The Arctic doesn't announce its power with drama. It works quietly, slowly, it erases things, and often, there's no one around to see it happen. Back in the early 1930s, the sea north of Alaska was trapped under a solid lid of ice. It felt permanent, ancient, like it had been there forever. The horizon was just a white blur. There were no landmarks, no trees, no mountains. The only sound was the deep, groaning groan of shifting ice, like some giant creature was stirring beneath the surface, and into this vast, silent emptiness, a cargo ship drifted. It wasn't wrecked, it wasn't sinking, it was just there upright. Her name was Bachimo, a cargo ship. This ship wasn't built for a mysterious fate. She was built for work, a tough steel-hulled coal-burning vessel launched in Sweden in 1914. She was unremarkable, designed for one purpose, to haul goods through hostile waters for the Hudson's Bay Company. And for years, that's exactly what she did. She carried furs, supplies, and trade cargo on routine trips along the Arctic coast. It was predictable work, almost boring, until the ice decided otherwise. In October of 1931, the Bachimo was near Point Barrow, Alaska, when winter slammed the door shut. Arriving early and with a vengeance, ice clamped around her hull like a steel vice. The temperature plummeted. The sea turned to solid rock. The ship was trapped, completely immobile. The crew did what Arctic crews do. They waited at first. Nobody panicked. Getting stuck in the ice for the winter was a known risk. They unloaded their supplies and built a small, temporary camp on the frozen sea nearby. They secured the ship, believing she was stable, and settled in to wait out the long, dark months. Then, a storm hit, but this wasn't the kind of storm you see in movies. With towering waves and crashing thunder, there was no open water for that. This was something worse. A white storm, a blizzard so intense that the wind screamed across the flat, frozen world, and visibility dropped to absolute zero. The ship, which had been right there, vanished behind a wall of blowing snow. When the storm finally passed, the crew walked back to where they had left the Bachimo, but she was gone. There was no wreckage, no splintered wood, no oil slick, just empty, fractured ice. The logical conclusion was that the immense pressure of the shifting ice had crushed her steel hull like a soda can and dragged her to the bottom. The Arctic had swallowed ships before for hours. The men searched the desolate landscape, convinced their ship was lost forever. But then, someone spotted something. A dark shape, far off in the distance. It was her, the Bachimo, still upright, still intact. She had somehow broken free from the ice that held her and drifted away, all alone. It took them days, but the crew managed to reach her again. She was damaged, but she was still floating, still functional in a way that felt deeply unsettling. She was still alive, but with winter conditions getting worse by the day, the captain made a tough call. They would have to abandon her for the season. No one believed she could possibly survive the brutal Arctic winter alone. Before they left, Captain Sidney Cornwell reportedly told his men something chillingly simple. "She's not going anywhere." He was wrong. Just a few weeks later, the Bachimo was spotted again. This time, she was miles from where they had left her, drifting slowly through the ice pack. Completely unmanned, she had become a ghost, a ship with no crew, no destination, and no voice. Several attempts were made to get back on board and salvage her. Some men managed to retrieve a portion of the valuable fur cargo, but every time they started making real progress, the Arctic would intervene. The weather would turn, the ice would shift, or a thick fog would roll in, and the ship would slip away, disappearing back into the white wilderness. Eventually, the Hudson's Bay Company made a decision as cold as the sea itself. They officially declared the Bachimo abandoned. The insurance was paid, the paperwork was filed, and the case was closed as far as the company was concerned. The ship was gone for good, but the Arctic doesn't care about paperwork. Over the next few years, strange reports started to trickle in from the most remote corners of the world. An Inuit hunter would tell a story of a silent ghost ship moving through the ice where no ship should be. A trapper would claim to see a large steel vessel drifting past the ice edge, with no smoke coming from its stack. A remote trading post would log an entry about a ship matching the Bachimo's description, appearing offshore one day and vanishing the next. There was no pattern to the sightings. She was seen off the coast of Alaska one year, then hundreds of miles away the next. She was always alone, always silent. She had transformed from an abandoned cargo ship into a legend, a story whispered by sailors and hunters across the north. Think about it. Ships are supposed to follow rules. They need fuel, they need a crew, they need maintenance. When they're abandoned in the harshest environment on Earth, they're supposed to sink or be crushed by ice. or run aground and rust away. The Bachimo did none of those things. She drifted for decades. She survived storms that would have destroyed modern vessels. She navigated through shifting fields of ice that could tear a steel hull apart. She did all of this without a single person on board, without a hand on the wheel, without a single light on in the dark. She was last reliably sighted in 1969, nearly 40 years after she was abandoned, still floating, still silent, locked in the Alaskan ice. Each year she should have been destroyed. Each year she returned, and with every new sighting, the question changed. People stopped asking how she was still afloat. They started asking why because the Arctic isn't just an empty, frozen wasteland. It's a place that seems to have its own will. It decides what to keep and what to take. And for some reason no one can ever explain, it chose to keep the Bachimo. It decides what to keep and what to take. And for some reason no one can ever explain. After that 1969 sighting, she vanished for good in 2006. The Alaskan government launched a project to find her, to finally solve the mystery of the ghost ship of the Arctic. But they never found a trace. It's as if, after decades of wandering, the Arctic finally decided her time was up, and took her back. Somewhere out there, resting on the seabed or still encased in a forgotten sheet of ice, lies the Bachimo, a ship that refused to die, a vessel that became a legend, a silent testament to the enduring mystery and power of the wild. In the vast, frozen expanse of the Arctic, time behaves differently, and stories, especially unfinished ones, don't just fade away. They harden, preserved in the ice, waiting. This is the story of a ship that refused to die, a vessel that became a legend, the Bachimo. Our story begins not with a dramatic sinking, but with an abandonment. In 1931, the SS Baychimo, a sturdy steel cargo steamer owned by the Hudson's Bay Company, became hopelessly trapped in Arctic pack ice. Her crew, facing a brutal winter, made the logical choice. They left. They built a shelter on the ice, expecting to wait out the winter and reclaim their vessel in the spring. But one night, a furious blizzard descended. When the storm cleared, the Bachimo was gone. The crew assumed she had been crushed by the ice and sunk. They were wrong. The ship had broken free and begun a journey that would last nearly 4 decades. Years passed. By the late 1930s, she was no longer a ship people expected to find. She was something people stumbled upon. Imagine this: you're part of a whaling crew, navigating through a thick, disorienting fog. Suddenly, a shape looms out of the mist. It's a ship's hull, its paint bleached almost white by the relentless sun and salt. Along the bow, you can just make out a name: Bachimo. There's no smoke from her stack, no lights in her windows, no sign of life. You assume she's finally run aground, a dead ship waiting to be torn apart by the next storm. But she wasn't. In 1939, a group of Inuit hunters found the vessel again, this time locked firmly in the ice of the Beaufort Sea. Driven by curiosity, they climbed aboard. The cabins had been stripped bare, probably by previous encounters. There were no signs of a struggle, no catastrophic damage that could explain how this ship had survived nearly a decade alone, without a crew, without a captain, without a soul. The hunters didn't stay long. Later they would describe the feeling on board. The ship didn't feel dangerous, or cursed, or haunted in the traditional sense. It just felt unfinished, as if it were perpetually waiting for something, or someone, that was never going to return. Then came World War II. The Arctic, once a busy thoroughfare for trappers and traders, grew quiet. Shipping lanes shifted. Military priorities moved south. For several years, the Bachimo vanished completely from all records. It seemed her lonely voyage had finally come to an end. But she came back. In 1947, a commercial trawler logged a sighting of an unmanned steel ship drifting west of Point Barrow, Alaska. The captain, a seasoned sailor, noted something deeply unusual in his log. Despite decades of exposure to the world's harshest environment, the ship still sat high in the water. By all logic, she should have taken on water, been flooded, and sunk long ago. But she wasn't. The sea, which claims all ships eventually, had not claimed the Bachimo. Each new sighting followed the same strange pattern. The ship would appear out of nowhere, sometimes trapped in ice, other times floating free in the open water. Intrigued, men would board her. They were a mix of curious sailors and opportunistic scavengers. They'd take small things, a piece of wood for a fire, a bit of scrap metal, a forgotten tool. But these small acts of plunder never changed her fate. No one ever tried to claim her entirely. Well, that's not quite true. Plans were made. Several times salvage operations were discussed. Imagine the prize, a perfectly good steel-hulled ship, just floating for the taking. But the Arctic itself seemed to protect its ghost ship. Every time a salvage attempt was planned, something would happen. The weather would turn in an instant. A clear day would become a blinding blizzard. The ice, once open, would close in, forming an impenetrable barrier. The ship would drift just out of reach, as if teasing her would-be captors, avoiding capture by inches, not miles. By the 1950s, the Bachimo was no longer just a derelict ship. She was a legend, a quiet one, talked about in hushed tones in the mess halls of icebreakers and the remote coastal villages. Sailors didn't really fear her, they respected her. She violated an unspoken rule of the sea. Things don't last that long. Ships decay, steel corrodes, wood rots, storms erase all evidence of their existence. Yet the Bachimo persisted. Year after year, decade after decade, she survived conditions that destroyed newer, stronger, crude vessels. How? How was this possible? Theories abounded. Some believed her unique hull design and perfect balance allowed her to ride the ice floes rather than be crushed by them. Others suggested, more poetically, that the Arctic simply wasn't done with her yet. She was seen drifting east one year, then spotted hundreds of miles to the west the next. Sometimes she hugged the coastlines. Other times she was found deep in the impenetrable pack ice. She followed no known current, no seasonal logic. It was as if she was wandering. Then the sightings became even more unsettling. In 1962, a group of Alaskan villagers saw the Bachimo floating offshore during a violent storm. But they saw something else, something impossible. They claimed to see lights inside the superstructure. Faint, flickering lights, visible through the frost-covered windows of the bridge. How? There was no power on that ship. The generators had been silent for 30 years. The fuel was long gone. Yet multiple witnesses insisted on what they saw. Officials dismissed their claims. Of course, it must have been reflections from the shore, the aurora borealis, or simply hallucinations brought on by the extreme cold and fatigue. But the stories persisted. By now the Bachimo had outlived nearly everyone who had ever sailed on her as a working vessel. The men who knew her engines, her quirks, her spirit, they were all gone. All that remained were these fragmented, inconsistent, yet stubbornly persistent second-hand accounts. She had earned a new name, one that would cement her place in maritime lore, the ghost ship of the Arctic. Not because she was a terrifying specter that attacked other ships, but because of something far more profound. She simply refused to end. In 1969, she was spotted for what would become the last confirmed time. She was where she had been so many times before, trapped in the sea ice off the coast of Alaska, leaning slightly to port, but otherwise completely intact. Another salvage crew considered the idea of towing her south, but the story repeated itself. Ice conditions worsened. The narrow window of opportunity closed, and the Bachimo drifted away, swallowed by the white horizon, one last time. After that, nothing. No wreckage was ever found. In the decades that followed, technology advanced. Satellites began to map the Arctic in incredible detail. Shipping traffic increased. Oil exploration intensified. The Arctic was no longer the uncharted mystery it once was. And yet, the Bachimo never reappeared. So, what happened to her? Some believe she finally sank, her old steel hull giving way after nearly 40 years alone. Others suggest she was slowly, silently crushed by the immense pressure of the shifting ice until nothing recognizable remained. But there's a problem with that. The Arctic usually gives something back, an oil slick, but the Bachimo left nothing. Just a trail of sightings stretching across almost 40 years. And so the story concludes in the only way it can. Not with an ending, but with an absence. A ship that moved without a crew, survived without care, and disappeared without a trace. Somewhere, beneath the shifting ice, or perhaps, even now, drifting through a remote, foggy channel, the Bachimo may still be out there, perfectly preserved in the cold, waiting to be found. Or perhaps she is still wandering, because the Arctic has never confirmed her death, and until it does, the Bachimo remains what she became in 1931, a vessel without a destination, and a story without an end. There are places on Earth where things go missing, and that's the end of it. A plane disappears over the ocean, a hiker vanishes in the mountains. We get coordinates, a search area, a final report. The world moves on. But then there's the Arctic. Up there, north of everything, the rules are different. The ice preserves. In most oceans, a lost ship becomes a wreck. It sinks, it breaks apart, its location is logged on a chart. The case is closed. But the story of the SS Baychimo is a case that has refused to close for nearly a century. Her ending, if she even has one, never arrived in a form we could understand. It all started in the autumn of 1931. The Bachimo, a sturdy steel-hulled cargo steamer, was making her final run of the season, loaded with a valuable cargo of furs. But the Arctic winter came early that year. The ship became trapped in the pack ice, a common but dangerous situation. The crew, facing the brutal cold, made the difficult decision to abandon ship and seek shelter on the nearby shore, planning to wait out the winter and retrieve the vessel in the spring. When a fierce blizzard struck, they hunkered down, assuming their ship was locked securely in the ice. But when the storm cleared, the Bachimo was gone. The ice had broken up, and the ship had vanished into the polar expanse. The crew assumed she had been crushed by the ice and sunk. Case closed. Right. Wrong. A few days later, an Inuit hunter spotted the ship drifting peacefully about 45 miles away. The crew managed to track her down and reboard, but the vessel was not in a state to be sailed. They salvaged the most valuable furs and, once again, left the Bachimo to her fate, convinced she wouldn't survive the winter. For the second time, they declared her lost to the Arctic, and that should have been it. Over the next 4 decades, she became the North's most famous phantom. She was seen again, and again, and again. Dozens of sightings, reported by seasoned sailors, Inuit hunters, and prospectors, people who knew the Arctic and had nothing to gain from telling tall tales. In 1932, a group of prospectors spotted her drifting near shore. The following year, a group of Inuit hunters actually boarded her. They were trapped aboard for 10 days by a sudden storm, an eerie experience on a completely silent, empty vessel. In 1939, she was sighted so close to shore that a Captain Schlosser tried to salvage her, but the treacherous moving ice made it impossible. He had to let her go. Each sighting was the same. The ship would appear out of the fog or from behind an iceberg, silent and unmanned, a dark shape moving with the currents. People would board her, find her eerily preserved by the cold, but attempts to tow or salvage her were always thwarted by sudden changes in weather or shifting ice. It was as if the ship, or the Arctic itself, didn't want her to be caught. She would appear just long enough to be noticed, then vanish again into the white wilderness. This is what makes the Bachimo so unsettling. It's not the idea of a ghost ship drifting alone. It's that she did it so successfully, for so long, on her own terms. She survived storms that sank other vessels. For almost 40 years, she outlasted the very men who built and sailed her. The last confirmed sighting was in 1969, a full 38 years after she was abandoned. A group of Inuit found her frozen fast in the ice of the Beaufort Sea. After that, nothing. Absolute silence. By the 1970s, the world had changed. We had satellites orbiting overhead, mapping the planet. Shipping routes were tracked by radar. The Arctic was no longer a complete unknown. And yet, even with modern technology watching from above, the Bachimo did not reappear. No radar contact. So what happened? Where did she go? The theories are as vast and cold as the Arctic itself. The most logical explanation is that she was finally, inevitably, crushed by the ice. Researchers believe she might have become trapped in what's called multi-year ice, which is incredibly thick and dense. Over years, the immense pressure would have slowly bent her steel hull inward, pulverizing the wood, scattering her cargo until nothing recognizable remained. It's a reasonable theory, but it's also incomplete, because even crushed wrecks in the Arctic tend to leave a trace. The ice moves, melts, and eventually releases fragments, pieces of wood, rusted metal, debris. They wash up on shores decades later, like messages in a bottle. The Bachimo has offered no such message. Another, more disturbing possibility is that she grounded on a remote, uncharted shoal. Imagine her tilted to one side, frozen in place, and then slowly encased in snow and ice, year after year, until she became part of the landscape itself. A ship transformed into terrain, a steel fossil, hidden in plain sight beneath a blanket of white. That theory is chilling because it means she could still be out there, not sunk, not destroyed, just waiting. And then there are the stories that professionals don't usually write down, the unofficial accounts. Pilots flying over the ice who claimed to see a ship-shaped shadow just beneath the surface. Hunters who reported a strange, dark mass where no rock formation should be. Radar operators who logged brief, unexplained anomalies and dismissed them as glitches or atmospheric interference. None of it is proof, but none of it is easily dismissible either. This is why the Bachimo occupies such a strange place in history, too real to be a myth, but too unresolved to be a closed case. What gives her story such incredible weight is not superstition, but repetition. Dozens of sightings, decades apart, by reliable witnesses. They saw her, they reported it, and they moved on. Perhaps the most telling detail is how people reacted to her. No one ever tried very hard to stay with the Bachimo. Salvage crews hesitated. After her initial abandonment, no one ever overwintered aboard her. It was as if people instinctively treated her as something you don't get too close to, something that repels permanence. A machine built to carry people forward had become an object that everyone instinctively backed away from. The Arctic, too, seemed to respect this strange boundary. It didn't sink her quickly or tear her apart dramatically. It allowed her to persist, to be seen, and then it would withdraw her again, back into its icy embrace. In that way, the Bachimo became more than just a ship. She became a lesson about our human need for answers. We expect neat endings. We want conclusions, with dates and causes and clear evidence. The Bachimo denied us all of that. Today, the Arctic is changing faster than ever. The ice is thinning. Shipping routes that were once impassable are opening up. Modern sonar can scan the seabed in greater detail than ever before. In 2006, the Alaskan government launched a project to finally solve the mystery and locate the ghost ship of the Arctic. They haven't found her. If the Bachimo is ever found, she will likely be a shadow of her former self, a collapsed hull, a pile of rusted steel half buried in sediment. And on that day, the story will finally have its ending. But until then, she remains a question mark on the map of the world. A ship that left port in 1931 and never truly arrived anywhere. A vessel that survived without a crew, moved without guidance, and disappeared without permission. Somewhere, in the vast, cold space between ice and water, between memory and myth, the Bachimo still exists, not as a ghost, but as a question the Arctic has never answered. And maybe, just maybe, it never will. Because in the coldest places on Earth, not everything that vanishes is truly gone.